Yes, sir.
I suppose the first question I'd like to ask is around the peace process itself, and if you like, the demise of the SDLP, and what your views are. I mean, it's almost as if the peace that created the peace process in the first place has now been consumed by the peace process. And John Hume, particularly, who was, a very key part, played a very key part in it, has almost been sort of like sidelined out of it to some extent, because of the growth of Sinn Féin and Republicans. So I'm interested in your views on that. And if you take it the other side, unionism, liberal unionism, has been sort of pushed out of the way as well. Again, your views about how that's going to be resolved, because the peace process doesn't seem to allow those two particular elements of society to exist. So that's the first question. And the second question really is around the extent to which you see a correlation at all between the settlement through the Belfast Agreement, and the post-Civil War settlement in the South. In a sense, that the post-Civil War settlement in the South entrenched the Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael divisions for decades in the Republic. And I just wonder whether the Belfast Agreement institutionalises and embeds those divisions within the North. So maybe in a sense, where the Republicans are saying no towards the Republic, we could be a million miles away from the Republic, because the ideologies of unionism and loyalism becoming embedded. So there's no potential for dialogue. So your views on those ones.
All right, thanks.
Well,
I'll keep you to the next seminar.
I'm glad you've given me two easy ones. The demise of the moderate parties, is... Well, I suppose I find it easier to explain the demise of the Ulster Unionist Party because I think Trimble signed up to a deal in April 1998 that he immediately knew had landed him with a difficult sell. And the SDLP, by contrast, I think, were more assured that they were less likely to have problems. And so even in the referendum campaign on the agreement, the British government were anxious to help Trimble during that referendum campaign, because I think they knew that he was in immediate trouble, because he was trying to sell the deal as no guns, no government, no prisoner releases, but the strength of wording in the agreement was not there to sustain that. And so after the referendum campaign, you had the elections in which the pro-agreement unionists only just about managed to beat the anti-agreement unionists. And it was Trimble with the loyalist paramilitary parties that just about held the line on the peace process. And then as the deceptions were kind of unveiled, so when prisoners were released and then Sinn Féin got into government without decommissioning, Trimble more obviously took a hit on that, because the DUP were able to say, well, you campaigned on no guns, no government, and here they're in government and there are no guns. So the demise of the UUP I find it easier to explain. You can see in the opinion polls, Protestant opinion immediately, from the elections to the Assembly, a month after the referendum, you can see the UUP's problems then, and then in opinion polls you can see the demise of Protestant support for the agreement thereafter. So Trimble's was immediately apparent to me at the time that he was in deep trouble, and the British and the Irish governments needed to move to shore him up if he was to try and sustain his position, and I don't think they did. And I think that was the biggest mistake that was made. Because whether you liked Trimble or not, you needed him to be able to sustain his position within unionism. And they didn't, and he was left to hang. Particularly when he went into government with Sinn Féin, he took a massive leap. And he kind of leapt into government on the understanding that the IRA would decommission or begin to decommission while this power sharing government was up and running, and then they didn't, and he was left.
Do you think therefore that the Sinn Féin wanted to get rid of Trimble because they wanted to create that sort of sectarian society?
Well, I mean, that's another cracking question, because I think from the Sinn Féin point of view, they would have looked at the referendum campaign, would have looked at the UUP's difficult election in June '98 and thought, hang on a minute, if we make concessions to Trimble and support his position, and he falls apart, then we're going to have to make even more concessions to the DUP. And I think there's a possibility there, at least. I did speak to one Republican who unguardedly made this point and then kind of tried to retract that, yeah, why would we give these concessions to Trimble when we know he's going anyway? Why not wait for the DUP and then give the concessions to them? Which is pretty cynical and not ideal, given that at least the UUPs were prepared to share power with nationalists, whereas at that point the DUP were not, completely not, and they'd never shown any likelihood that, and they'd been the most sectarian of the parties. The SDLP's demise is, I think, harder to explain because yes, it was on their ground. They held, I feel very sorry for both the UUs and the SDLP because these guys made the agreement. They kept Northern Ireland together during the Troubles, basically. When it could have flown apart, they tried to keep the centre ground going. And the SDLP, some argue that the SDLP should have been more aggressive towards Sinn Féin in pushing them to decommission. But the SDLP calculated that that would make them suffer more electorally. And that our problem is continuingly there's been polarisation of electoral politics. And you're right, there are deep concerns about the institutionalisation of sectarianism. There have been glimmers with Sinn Féin and the DUP moderating their rhetoric at points. And now that DUP and Sinn Féin are king of their communities, that they might take more accommodating steps towards each other. Robinson made speeches at one point that looked like they were more accommodating, talking about Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland identity and our community, referring to the whole people of Northern Ireland rather than just his wee people. That looked a bit more hopeful, but yes, it's a continuing issue about sectarianism in Northern Ireland and how that's to be addressed in the future to embed the peace process more.
Okay. Colleague on the left, Jim?
Yeah, just one little thing. I'm going back quite a few years here when I'm telling this story. Years ago, after the 6 o'clock news on the Sky TV, you would have sometimes an Irish politician would be interviewed. So I happened to ring up this night, and I'm going back quite a few years, with Brian Lenihan Sr., I might add, and he was a guest. And I happened to ring up and ask the question. The British media were bellowing out louder, shall we say, than Paisley, and that takes some doing, about Ulster, the conflicts in Ulster. Now, it may be a half-truth, it certainly was in Ulster, and they were bellowing out, it's in the north of Ireland. And both of them were half-truths. You have Donegal, which is the most northern county in Ireland, so therefore the conflict wasn't in the north of Ireland. You have Cavan and Monaghan, which Donegal as well, which are the three sovereign counties belonging to the Irish Republic. So therefore the conflict was across the border in the northeastern counties of Ireland. But it didn't suit the British agenda to talk about the northeastern counties. It had to be Ulster, which was a recrimination on the three sovereign counties that belonged to the Irish Republic. Now, the other thing, when I asked the question, the guy, he got very uptight, shall we say, with me. And Brian Lennon was sitting there and I had his legs crossed. And when I asked the question. I said, how does the Brains of Britain propose to solve the problem when they don't know where the problem is? And Brian Lennon gave a great big smile to himself. So that was one thing. But then I just want to carry on about this conflict here. I've been hearing half-truths here tonight as well. I think maybe it's a spin of... Now, I'm not here to defend Sinn Féin, but it's a Sinn Féin bashing exercise as far as I see. The whole conflict started off with the civil rights movement. And the civil rights were battered and bruised and brutalised the whole way from Belfast with the help of the RUC and the B Specials and the Loyalists, or so-called Loyalists. And they were through over the bridges at Clontarf Bridge. But effectively, when they got into Derry, certainly there was riots started because the B Specials and the RUC and everybody else attacked. They were beat, and they were beat to a standstill. And what became very famous is the Battle of the Bogside. And then they brought in the British soldiers to help stabilise it. Things were very, very good for a while. And then what happened? The Loyalists shot the first British soldier. Whether you believe that or whether you don't, they did. And the RUC killed the first man in my hometown of Dunhaven, a man by the name of Francie McCluskey. We called him Francie Paul Bay. There was a man by the name of Devaney, was attacked at his own door. He stuck his head out the door to see what was going on up the road. A policeman came down, or so-called policeman, and smashed him over the head and killed him. So that was the first two. But then things escalated from there. Now, I heard tonight they're saying with terrorists, the British Army, RUC, the B Specials, and police reserves, a whole lot, they were the only people that were the only people that were terrorising people at that particular time. The IRA, certainly the IRA was there, the Irish Republic Army was there, but they were in very, very small numbers. And it was only after all the burnings in Belfast and the nationalist communities who were burnt out of their homes, lucky to get away with their lives. Some of them were killed. You had the Ballymorphy massacres, which the paratroopers participated. They killed a priest as well, going out, giving absolution to some of the people. And then they come down a few weeks later and they murdered on the streets of Derry. Now, I can tell you firsthand that after that, there were queues going up to the IRA. The IRA were actually pulling people away. They didn't want them. And that's how things escalated. The people were terrorised, and the IRA defended them. And that is the truth.
Thanks for that. Yeah, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I hope. Well, I'm surprised you think it was a Sinn Féin bashing exercise, because I thought I'd bashed various different.
I'm not here to defend them, so.
Yeah, no. I mean, you say something about a Sinn Féin bashing exercise. I thought I'd given pretty much all the politicians of Northern Ireland a bit of a going over. There's no. It's not what I'm trying to argue. I mean, what I was actually defending was really the deceptions that all the politicians had used, whether they're Sinn Féin or David Trimble or Ian Paisley and Peter Robinson or Tony Blair. It's more about what skills politicians use. And from Sinn Féin's point of view, they've been attacked by Republican dissidents as being sellouts, as being traitors. So it's not really, I wasn't really setting out to bash Sinn Féin. I was more trying to show you what kind of political skills that all politicians used in Northern Ireland to bring peace there. Yeah. And then it's up to you whether you think that those skills were necessary or justifiable. And I guess I hope I didn't use the word did I use the word terrorist?
No, you didn't.
No. Okay, good. Yeah, I mean, I think the word terrorist is demonising, and it's been not very useful when applied to situations. So I would agree with you there.
Yes, sir.
You quoted a figure of population of 1.5 million for Northern Ireland. Now, my recollections as a result of the 1991 census, it seems to have gone up to about 1.6 million, and the growth has been in the nationalist community. To me, this was the trigger of the peace process. The fact that the demographics were changing, you've gone from a situation of having 2 Catholic majority counties at the time of the partition to 4.
Yeah.
All right, most of the population was in the east, but you now had the full western counties all had nationalist majorities, and you then had Nelson Mandela say talk to the IRA. Now, to me, that was as much of a kickstart as anything else.
Yeah. I mean, you're right about the population. I just pulled 1.5 million out because during the Troubles, that was roughly what the population. I think it might even be going up towards 1.7 million now. Yeah. So, I mean, my understanding of the peace process is that it was getting the seeds of it, at any rate, can be seen in the kind of mid-early 80s when it appeared that there was kind of stalemate, and it was the Republican movement looking to move out of their armed struggle towards a peace process. And while I think the demographic argument was used by Republicans and by nationalists to say, well, look, lads, put down the guns because we're going to naturally become a majority in Northern Ireland. And President Clinton made some ribald comment about how the population might be further expanded in order to get a nationalist majority in Northern Ireland. But there is a difference between a Catholic majority in Northern Ireland and a nationalist majority in Northern Ireland. There's always been a significant minority of Catholics who've supported the Union, and I think, if anything, since the Good Friday Agreement, Belfast Agreement, that support for the Union has actually grown. I think there was movement maybe after the first IRA ceasefire, greater support for a united Ireland, but that now seems to have dropped away, and there seems to be quite considerable support among Catholics for the Union because of the fact that now nationalists share power in Northern Ireland. The Irish culture is much more recognised and respected than it was before, and therefore the Union is perhaps less of a problem than it was in the past.
Helen, yeah? Yes, sir.
I was just going to say before the gentleman behind spoke that I actually was going to say I thought you gave a really balanced view for me tonight of the story, and I lived with it, I grew up with it, and came to England in fact, so my children wouldn't be questioning, am I playing the Catholic or a Protestant child? So they were brought up in England for that very reason. That's really why we left. And my only, one of the bigger problems I had was, and I think you helped me unpick a lot of this tonight, as a teacher, I really found it very hard to cope when Martin McGuinness became First Minister for Education in Northern Ireland. And it sort of didn't sit with me. And I felt if I were there, I might have to give up my job as a teacher or work under him. But I think you've helped me tonight unpick some of that because of what we're doing behind the scenes. So thank you for that.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you.
5 minutes. Anybody else have a question? Yes, sir.
My name is Gordon Jackson from Bhutan. I've been here 22 years, and I probably, in answer to that question that used to be asked, job applications in Northern Ireland, are you a Protestant or Catholic? Well, if you weren't a Protestant or Catholic, but then say, are you perceived to be a Protestant or perceived to be a Catholic? So I would be perceived to be a Protestant. So a couple of things really. Here in Luton about 2 weeks ago we had a bit of a fiasco, maybe the wrong word, about people being asked to leave a bar in Luton because of worm hobbies. Now, what was ironic about this was in Stormont you had Mitchell McLaughlin, the Speaker of the Northern Ireland Assembly, Sinn Féin, presiding over a Remembrance Day service with Sinn Féin MLAs present, and I thought that showed a bit of a contrast. He also yesterday, when Peter Robinson gave his last answers questions in Stormont, the Ulster Unionists remained seated Sinn Féin stood and applauded him along with the DUP, so that was an interesting one. But the latest bit that I think is interesting in terms of the deception of politics is in the Stormont House talks that just happened, didn't get much coverage over here, was mine contribution in Northern Ireland by Virgin, was that on the issue of welfare reform, the agreement was that it would go back to Westminster, and it was in Westminster last night and tonight, and I thought that was the greatest fudge, dare I say it, by Sinn Féin, to say, okay, we'll agree to this new deal, but the welfare reforms will not be decided by us here in Northern Ireland. We're going to park that back over in Westminster so that they can take the blame for imposing the cost.
Yes, sir.
About the poppies that were supposedly taken off from people 2 weeks ago, which taken way out of context. It was taken way out of context. The poppies weren't taken off them. They were asked to remove them. And some of the people actually made comments on the website that didn't wear poppies that night. But they actually, the ones made the comments that the poppies were ripped off us. Just to answer this question. They were not taken off the people. No, they were not.
Yes.
No, they were not.
The bigger mistake you make, the more lies you. You'll come across here as you favour what they did because it brought peace. No. Now some of the things they've done, according to behind the scenes, were criminal in some respects. You can argue why you like them. The bigger the mistake, the bigger the lie. And you can find that going throughout your whole life. If you've got a big mistake, you'll make a big lie out of it. If you've got a small mistake, it's a small lie. Politicians.
If the peace process is based on fudge, okay, half-truths, lies, you said it was achieved and it got something. Now I go to Northern Ireland to see my sister regularly, and I can see the Catholics have gained immensely from it. They've got a great education system. They have houses, they build their own houses, they're all professionals over there now. So they have really gained from that. But there is one thing that can wreck that peace process again, and that is the lack of cohesion between Protestant and Catholics. It isn't there, and they're leading parallel lives.
I think that's a really good point, and it goes back to what our friend was saying about the institutionalisation of sectarianism, the reproduction of those kind of divisions, so that I think one of our friends was saying before about Northern Ireland being a bit of a volcano. Yeah, I mean it's a low-level simmer. Thankfully, it's not what it was at much higher boiling point, but the potential, I think, is still there, and it's not for politicians here or there to take their eye off the ball in terms of trying to consolidate this further and take this down the line. But the problem is that it seems to me that when politicians do try and compromise, and some of these tactics, it's hard for me to understand how politicians could have made peace in any other way where the communities have been so polarised. Because if you had told them the truth that actually this is not going to lead to United Ireland, this is power sharing with an Irish dimension, but you're going to have to remain part of the union. And if you'd said to unionists, well, chaps, you're not going to get majority rule, you're not going to be ruled from Westminster like you'd like, you're going to have power sharing with Republicans, you put it as boldly as that, you wouldn't have had any peace process. And it's really been people going down the line, and you look at the DUP, look at the U-turn that the DUP did between 2006 and 2007 in sitting in power with Sinn Féin. I mean, that's remarkable. How loyalists, DUP supporters must have looked at Paisley, who in the marching season of 2006 was, we'll never share power with these people over my dead body and all of this. And then the next thing you see is the Chuckle Brothers. But boy, is that a much better thing for Northern Ireland than having English people telling Northern Irish people how to run their lives. Much better that they take responsibility on themselves for these decisions in the long run and don't devolve them outside of Northern Ireland. I mean, that would have, to me, be a more ideal situation.
Can I just ask you if you see in South Africa they set up a peace and reconciliation, which seems to me is something that would be very desirable for Ireland, and is there any possibility of, or do you see any possibility of that happening in the future, or do you see it becoming and staying more polarised?
See, that's another easy question, Tom. I mean,
you earn your crust when you come to
Yeah, the problem is that we can all see kind of the injustices that have happened on all sides to a lot of people. But one side's injustices of another side's justice. And the Peace and Reconciliation Commission, like South Africa, I mean, in South Africa, there was a lot of unhappiness with it, and it did cause considerable problems. In many ways, it would be an ideal, but the problem is how you implement this. And what unionists are concerned about is that what's going to happen is that government records, security forces records will all come out, and there will be killings by the security forces will be revealed, and the collusion and death squads will all come out, but Republican killings, of which there are 2,000 out of 3,700, that they won't be investigated because the evidence won't be there, the witnesses won't be there, so it will be a one-sided justice. That will be the perception of unionists, and that's worrying and potentially destabilising for Northern Ireland. So, I mean, it's another situation where there's no clear answer and where everyone ends up dissatisfied.
So we are,
but there are real risks in peace and reconciliation.
So we're dependent on the politicians going forward, basically. Whatever we think of them, they got us to where we are.
Well, I mean, it would be nice if there was an upsurge in support for the moderate parties in Northern Ireland, a resurgence of the Alliance Party, the SDLP and the UUP, but there look as though there were no signs of that.
Like bear in the time we got John and politician French there.
I'm looking to the future now because there will always be a situation where there'll be a lot of people with very sore hearts on both sides of the community and other parts of the community, people who have died down the years as a result of what's happened in the north of Ireland. The concern I've got is that you talked about almost used the word devious politicians. And I think that some of them genuinely want to look to a better future for Ireland, and particularly the north of Ireland, after all its troubles. But I mean, I, as a Catholic from a nationalist background, miss the influence of David Irvine, good Protestant person, but a man who came out with some logical attitudes to the whole. I don't regard him as a devious person. John Hume, on our side, if you want to put it that way, you couldn't regard him as being devious in my estimation. He was, in my opinion, the architect of the peace process. He stuck his neck out, and he was lucky perhaps not to get shot. But the real concern I have is where we go from here, because there's still, understandably, an underlying bitterness that still exists there. When you have questions of politicians, when you listen to what they're talking about in the Assembly, I'm concerned about the future, and I want to know what you think the politicians mean it when they're looking to the future as an Assembly. I mean, let's be fair, when we talk about Martin McGuinness being Deputy First Minister, according to the agreement, he's a joint First Minister. But the DUP want to continue to feel that they're in the supremacy position by classifying it as a First Minister and a Deputy First Minister. But the peace dividend is what I'm really concerned about. Where is the peace dividend? This country, our government here in Britain, here in England, have a big task, because I don't think they're playing the game. They wanted the peace process. They want peace in Ireland. They want peace in the north of Ireland. They want people to be reconciled. But they do not. With all the cutbacks, they're not pumping enough money into the north of Ireland, and they're certainly not bringing in jobs. And the politicians are party to that, because the jobs, certainly what few jobs are coming to the north of Ireland, going to Belfast, there's not many going to Derry. And that's where problems can arise for the future. We don't want to lose any more young people coming to move or who will get jobs. We want them to stay there, be reconciled with each other, and we want them to get jobs. And we want them to have money pumped into that country now. The politicians procrastinated too long. We've listened to them for too long. We're headed for disaster unless we do something about it now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make some really good points there. And while Northern Ireland's in a much better position than it was 20 years ago, there's still some way to go. And we're talking about institutionalisation of sectarianism. And now the EUP have gone into opposition, maybe the SDLP should go into opposition as well. Maybe having a grand coalition in power is not necessarily the way to go. And some people have looked at the institutional makeup to ask whether there couldn't be a better way of organising politics there that doesn't necessarily flag up sectarian differences and doesn't ask people to say whether they're unionist or nationalist or not. On the class issues that you've raised, I think that's very important as well, that there is considerable inequality in Northern Ireland, not just among nationalists, as you say, but amongst unionists. And David Irvine was an attempt to represent a socialist unionism and draw attention to unionist disadvantage. And in that respect, you know, maybe he was plugging a gap that the DUP, with its support for free market policies, is not necessarily going to help unionist working class people in West Belfast, who often live in pretty deprived circumstances themselves. And then a lot of the kind of structural inequalities between unionists and nationalists have also not been addressed, and they persist. So nationalists are more likely, or Catholics are more likely to be disadvantaged as well.
We'll have one more question, please.
Thank you for your excellent evening's enlightenment. I've lived with 4 world religions for 14 years, 10 years for my doctoral thesis. So any killing or anything like that in the name of religion is just madness and total unreality. But when we're dealing with cyclical problems, which have gone over centuries, I think it seems that we've really got to consider that they're not going to be healed overnight. And therefore they should be brought out. And this was the thing that Tutu explained for his Peace and Justice. You have to open the wounds a little to show people, and that actually starts the healing process. And I think one of the things you haven't brought into the discussion, probably purposely, is the question of religion. But I think in schools, the integrated policy that you had in Northern Ireland actually started a really good process, that we have to teach the young differently. And I've taught in 85 schools, mainly religion and other subjects. And I think one of the answers is that every child should be taught to be a whole person. Art, music, design, computers, and in that way, then their travel, they're broadened. Eton is £35,000 a year, and a comprehensive £3,000 a year. And we've got to change those imbalances in the whole structure of society and the way we look at what a human being is. He is divine, he's brought in the image and likeness of God, and he's a royal priest because St. Peter said so. We all share the royal priest of Christ. And so it's changing the perception of how we see each other. The Hindus greet each other to Master, the divine in you. And all their people go to the temple. But we've got people falling away from each other. So that's it.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about it before. I mean, I think religion plays a kind of more subtle role in the Northern Ireland conflict with certain imagery. But as you say, and I think alludes to what other people have said as well, that these kind of communal divisions are still deeply entrenched and reproduced partly through the churches and through separate education. And there is an integrated movement in Northern Ireland, and some people have argued it's not properly funded, that the demand is greater than the supply. And of course that comes down again to resources. And obviously Northern Ireland, for English politicians, has never been a priority until things kick off there. And it's to be hoped that this government has the imagination to realise that, and the Irish government in the south, has the imagination to realise that the situation needs constant attention in order to consolidate the situation that we have at the moment and to improve it further and address some of these issues that we've talked about this evening.
Paul, thank you very much for